welcome back. You're watching Citizen Extra. As we told you, several MPs could be accessing Parliament buildings for the last day today, as the 11th Parliament is hours away to adjourn for what could be its final break in this electoral cycle. It's only 53 days now to the election, which many of the sitting MPs will contest to regain their seats. But what have been the highlights of the 11th Parliament? What have been the successes and the failures? Francis Gashuri standing by in Parliament. Gashuri, what do you have for us?
Thank you very much. Good morning once again, Hussein Mohammed. Indeed, as we earlier spoke, there is a session that is ongoing, the 10 to 12:30 session here in the National Assembly, and then there will be another session at 2:30 until the business of the House is concluded with. That is later in the afternoon. And as earlier we pointed out, there was some stalemate because of the division of revenue, that stalemate between the National Assembly and the Senate. That now has been resolved, Hussein, because the mediation panel, the 8-member team, comprising 4 members from the National Assembly and 4 members from the Senate, has been able to sit and deliberate on that matter and come to a conclusion that the county governments will be allocated 302 billion shillings in the 2017-2018 financial year. So that matter has now been resolved, and the bill will now, or the report of the mediation panel, will be tabled in the National Assembly for adoption by the House. And Hussein, as we earlier said, this quote-unquote is the closing day for the members of the National Assembly, and they can only be recalled here unless there is a special sitting to deliberate on some of the pending issues, basically. So the indefinite adjournment of the House will be taking place this afternoon. And so what have been the highlights, the lows, the highs of the of the 11th Parliament? And now I'm joined by 2 members of Parliament, Yusuf Hassan from Kamukunji and Opio Wandai from Ugunja, just to get their views about what they think have been the highs and the lows of their time in the 11th Parliament, and what they think should be done, or what the next Parliament should be able to do, or should pay priority to in the coming House. Let me start with you, Opio. Many people know you for the Firimbi movement. Probably that was your highest movement, your high movement of the 11th Parliament?
Without doubt, Francis, the Firimbi movement was the epitome of democracy. Indeed, it is the movement that brought into the fore the matter of the IBC reforms and other reforms that the country was yearning for. So I am very proud of the fact that I contributed my part in the Firimbi movement that actually opened the gates for these other reforms that we talked about. But having said that, the lowest moment of this 11th Parliament, in my view, was the passage of the infamous security amendment laws, okay, sometime in 2015. It's a moment that the country would forever remember as regrettable. But having said that again, I must also say that this Parliament was the Parliament that came into being immediately after the promulgation of the Constitution. So it's basically a transition Parliament, and it has done its bit. You recall that this Parliament actually has not really gone 5 years, it's basically 4.5 years or so. And it has really set the ground for the next Parliament and subsequent Parliaments. I would have wished that this Parliament would play its role of oversight better, if it was in my capacity. But having said that, we have to live with what has happened here.
Very well. And having said that, let me also indulge Honorable Yusuf Hassan. What do you think have been the highlights of the 11th Parliament? What do you think have been the highs and the lows, and maybe areas that needs to be improved, so that in terms of debates, the quality of debates can improve?
First of all, I would say, taking the honourable member for Ugunya's cue, is that the lowest point, in fact, for me, was the Firimbi movement. And to a certain extent, my colleague confuses activism with parliamentary representation. We were elected to represent the people of Kenya in the National Assembly, not to be activists out in the streets. To bring activism into Parliament, to obstruct the parliamentary procedure, was a low point in the history of our Parliament, and he has also paid the price of being out of Parliament for so long, not representing his own constituency in the important deliberations of Parliament. I also think that the passing of the Security Act was one of the highest point in the lowest point in my estimation, because of the action of the opposition to stop the democratic procedures in Parliament using extra parliamentary methods wasn't really in the ethics and the procedures of the Parliament, and I think they should have accepted a democracy and the majority view to take its place and allow the peaceful passing of those laws. But having said that, I think this Parliament was a historic Parliament. We played a midwifery role. We played a historic role to bring constitutional laws into place. I think the parliamentarians will be proud that we have passed 140 bills and laws in this Parliament, more than any other Parliament. The second aspect was to anchor our devolved government into the constitutional process and to make it a reality. I think this is a major achievement for our Parliament. But having been in the 10th Parliament, one of the shortcomings of this Parliament is the fact that in terms of numbers, we were just too many. 240 something members of Parliament would never get the platform that they need to express themselves on the floor. And it has become very frustrating for members to be able to be heard, and many members are going to leave this Parliament having not contributed significantly to the debates and to the laws of this country, not because of lack of wanting, but simply because the Speaker cannot deal with the large number of parliamentarians that we have, and the last Parliament was much more effective in reaching out and speaking out in Parliament.
Is there maybe a better way of doing it in terms of improving maybe the quality of debates? For example, can members probably be indulged more to learn how to participate even more effectively in the committees of the House, because basically that's where the bulk of the legislative functions take place.
As an active member of several committees myself, Budget Committee, Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and the delegated legislation, I think our ability to participate and effectively contribute to debates in the committees, which are crucial, as you have said, are lacking because of that lack of knowledge. The gap between, we have very highly talented, highly educated members of Parliament, but they are in a minority. There are a large number of parliamentarians who simply cannot cope with the pressures of legislation, with the challenges of legislation, even with the language and the ability to be able to express themselves. So I think it will be a very good opportunity to look at other models, what is working in the United States, what is working in the UK, what is working in India, Malaysia and other countries in South Africa, so that we can make our committees much more effective and much more engaging they are. At the moment, members of Parliament sometimes come too late to committees, unprepared and not aware of the issues, the critical issues that have been discussed. And I think that is because of lack of induction and preparation and teaching members how best to use those committees to be effective representatives.
When you look at this Parliament, the 11th Parliament, has also witnessed a lot of friction between the majority and the minority, and sometimes you hear a lot of criticism being leveled at the members of Parliament that they have forgotten that it is the minority side and the majority side, not necessarily the government and the opposition.
Well, one of the biggest tragedies we have had to endure in this Parliament is the misconception that once you come from the majority side, you are an extension of the executive. So that has really blurred the line between the executive and the legislature, because for many a time you find members from the majority side behaving as if they are speaking for the executive, which is not the role of parliamentarians, regardless of which side of the house you sit. Yeah. So that education needs to be enhanced so that people understand what they come to do in Parliament. But again, I wanted to say that the executive has really worked hard to emasculate this Parliament. As the curtain comes down on the 11th Parliament, it's sad that it has really been reduced to the level of what I would imagine was the 6th or something Parliament. Yes, which was basically a mouthpiece of the then ruling party. Yeah, I hope when you come back to the next Parliament, things will improve.
Thank you. Final word.
Yes, I think there's a lot that we can improve in terms of the opposition's participation. For example, one of the things I found constantly in terms of the failure of the opposition was to come into Parliament to persuade parliamentarians. Sometimes there are arguments that we all agree with, where there is no opposition or government, matters of common interest, legislations that are of national interest, like the security, that you didn't really need to divide government majority party and minority party. So I think maybe the opposition needs to learn. Like in the 10th Parliament, there was a lot of collaboration between the opposition members and the majority party members, and I think we can improve that. The second element also, I think, is to create a consensus whereby we do not make everything political and oppositional, when we know that some of those things are of interest and also benefits the ordinary Mwananchi. So I hope to come back to a parliament where we can build a consensus to work much more better for the people of Kenya, rather than count ourselves as a majority party or opposition party. Work for the good of this country, work for the unity of this country, and create legislation that will make this country much better and a greater country than it is.
Thank you very much, Honorable Yusuf Hassan. Member of Parliament Ben Momanyi, what do you think have been the highlights of this Parliament? What is that one thing that you will remember this 11th Parliament for? And probably where would you want adjustments done, improvements, to make sure that the 12th Parliament will be more effective?
Thank you, my brother. One major issue that we faced in this Parliament, which is coming to an end today. This Parliament, I can tell you, my brother, for free, it was not independent. We did not have the independence in the House to express ourselves independently. You could find most of the time, as one of my friends has said, most of the people in the majority side, were behaving as if they were government itself. They could not differentiate between executive and the Parliament. We hope when we come back next time, we'll have the independence of the House, so that people can express themselves independently. And I can tell you, these days, you don't have to be a sycophant to anybody, because if you are a member of Parliament, there is nothing the head of state can do to you. I mean, you don't expect, I mean, you don't have to follow, you don't have to be a sycophant to be named a cabinet minister. I mean, it really, when you come here, you should come here and do your work independently as a member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Asante sana. Hussein, those are the sentiments being expressed by members of the 11th Parliament as the curtains are finally drawn on their term. And, well, as we said, it is the indefinite adjournment of the House this afternoon, but they can be recalled at any given time to come and transact the pending business of the House. Among them, the gender principle bill that remains pending, and that is one of the critical issues that need to be sorted out by Parliament before we head to the general election. Well, that's for now. Definitely, when we get another opportunity, we'll be able to sample more and more views from members of Parliament as they exit the 11th Parliament, ready to contest in the august polls to try and find whether they can make it back to the 12th Parliament. Back to you, Hussein.
All right, thank you so much, Francis Gashuri, joining us live from our Parliament. In studio, we'll get more sentiments from a political analyst, Dr. Sam Kamau, Stephen Mogaka, who's also a political analyst, and West Mugirango, MP candidate for Wiper. Gabriel Muzuma, still with us, a political analyst. Thank you so much for making time for us. I'll start with a basic question first. What would you say you can remember this Parliament for? The one word that comes to mind. Muzuma, I'll start with you.
I think if I was to use the one word, I think Sakaja brought the youth bill, and I think that has been one of the most critical bills I've ever seen. So to me, that's kudos for the likes of Sakaja.
Sam?
Well, from my end, I think the one memorable thing I would say is partisanship that was expressed especially during the acrimonious attempt to pass the security amendment laws in 2014 and also the Elections Amendment Act. I think partisanship was a key characteristic of this Parliament, where people simply could not agree based on party lines.
Based on party lines. Right, Mugaka.
Yeah, I think patronage is what we saw, that politicians in the House were not thinking by themselves, but getting so-called orders from their political fathers. But yes, there were voices of reason. I will also add to the Sakaja bill, the gentleman who did the Banking Amendment Act, which capped the interest rates, thereby taming the bankers that had decided to be an empire on themselves.
Right. Gabriel, what would you say then was the key failure you witnessed in Parliament over the last 4.5 years.
Hussein, by the way, that's a very good question. I think the all law that I saw was the security bill that we were talking about, apart from the drama that we saw. I mean, almost members of parliament getting into a physical fight. And then again, you ask, Hussein, you ask yourself, what became out of that bill? I mean, security has greatly improved. If you talk to a normal Kenyan, you know, back in the day where bombs were all over, and you know, terrorism was actually almost getting to tear this country apart. And you remember the rhetoric that was being set across: oh, your phones will be, I mean, the situation will change. People will be knocking in the door. I mean, every little thing that you say, you'll have security forces behind your back. But see, Hussein, when you divorce politics and you start understanding the truth of where, you know, good minds, when they come together, can actually take this nation, you start asking yourselves, where are those rhetoric questions that were being, you know, were being propelled back in the day? And you see, that is the funny thing when we encompass ourselves into the directory of parties, and we become, you know, we become silly. You know, the leadership mantle actually escapes, and what is left is for you to just be a yes man or a yes woman, and that's really not what we'd like for this country. So that youth bill actually provided a scenario, provided room, actually gave us a platform where you know, our security apparatus have been able to do so many things in, you know, in matters to ensure that Kenya continues to be safe. So I think, to me, that was the all-time low that I saw Parliament sink. And you know, the Firimbi movement that these guys were talking about, it is actually, it did not send actually a good picture. It was covered all over, from Timbuktu to the United States. Every CNN was covering the issues in Parliament. And I think, you know, if the next Parliament coming in, I think they should do all they can to regain back the glory that I think we lost through this Parliament.
I think, Sam, that should also be one of the things you talk about as key failures. Again, one of the things you say you remember most, and the same thing Gabriel Muduma is talking about, should be because of partisanship, isn't it?
Well, Hussein, maybe I would look at it in a slightly more expanded view, because if you consider the key roles of Parliament, when you talk about legislation, you've just had the member for Kamukunji saying that they have managed to pass over 140 bills within that time. So in that sense, we can commend them. But when you look at the issue of oversight, I think there is one place Parliament has failed. So when you look at some of the controversies and the investigations that have been taking place, especially within PAC, we had accusations of bribery, money exchanging hands to kill some reports, and the attempts to get to the bottom of certain issues, being frustrated at different levels. And like somebody said, some people in Parliament saw them as themselves as an extension of the executive. That means that Parliament was not able to hold executive to account on certain issues, or even other government bodies and state corporations. I think there's still a lot that remains. We feel that Parliament did not play that role as it should have been expected. But even on the issue of representation, I think to a large extent, even if we spoke about partisanship in the beginning, when these guys are looking at issues that would benefit them, I think Wanjiku is forgotten. These guys can unite and push things that would...
regardless of what their party bosses will tell them.
Exactly. But when it comes to matters of Wanjiku, we can't say, and I think there is that feeling among the electorate that these guys did not properly represent our interests and our issues. And even if even the fact that the Constitution guarantees public participation, even if there are attempts to entrench that, I think very little of what Wanjiku would have wanted made it to Parliament.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think on the legislative front, where the outgoing MPs are thumping their chests, I don't agree that they did so much as they want to claim credit on. Because the bulk of these pieces of laws that were brought in, were those that the Constitution demanded, were those that we had put in place institutions, including the CIC, including the Kenya Law Reform, including the Attorney General's Office, to give the Constitution an enabling environment, because those laws were really required. Input by the legislators was very minimal. They were really a conveyor belt for that. But on the question of representation, Hussein, I think that is where the legislators have a beating, because if you listen to parliamentary proceedings, every member is called as member from constituency A, constituency B. But when you listen to what was coming out of their mouths, it was not in the best interest of the constituencies they are called by and they are representing. They were happy stories that belonged to the larger political formations at the expense of the constituencies that elected them. And on the oversight is where we really failed, because we are talking about so much graft. We are talking about failures of very many constitutional commissions. We are talking of strikes from various public servants, and really this is where the parliamentary role should have been key, but we did not see that, and the anarchy and the loss of public man hours that we saw were largely contributed by the very, very poor oversight by our legislative assembly.
Right. One of the other things we saw, I'll go back to the issue of partisanship now. One of the things we saw and what the opposition was always lamenting about was tyranny of numbers. And the question is it or was it a good or bad thing? Is it good or bad for Kenya's democracy? After all, it's a democratic process that leads to tyranny in the National Assembly. So what do you think? Was it a good or bad thing for Kenya's democracy? I'll start with you, Mzuma, again.
You see, Hussein, I don't think there will ever come a time, and if it does, then I think it will be those, one-offs, where you'll have a parliament that is equal. I think at one point, though that's the price of our democracy, you'll have one side having more members and probably the other having, lesser members. But what I think should be sustained is what you call the element of goodwill. Wanting to know what Wanjiko wants, and if you carry that on a ballpark element, you'll find that it is going to be so issue-based rather than subscribing to what your party keeps recommending. So I think when it comes to representing Wanjiko, the members of parliament need to go down to the nitty-gritty issues that are affecting their area of representation rather than what their party subscribes. So you come to an arena where you're presented with two issues. Number one is what what your party is saying and really what Wanjiko wants. And I think that's where we have to divorce when this issue of saying tyranny. If you're talking about issues of national of a national outlook, whether if you're looking at security, that's something that can actually be debated upon, where you're talking about you're going to accept this bill because you have the power in the House. If there are key issues that you want to take, or probably the presidential agenda, then those are two different things that we're talking about. But when it comes to the issues that are affecting the common mwananchi, you want to keep them safe. You want to see how are we getting our people, our men and women in uniform? Are we going to add the troops in places like Somalia? I think then that probably somebody can crop up and say, that will require the tyranny of numbers. But at the end of the day, the representation for Wanjiko, and I don't again want to run away from this, even though probably we can discuss it later, Hussein. The issue of what the MP for Kamukunji is talking about, the over-representation, I think it's the high time we the key architects of our country sit down to see, do we really need 290 people representing this nation? You're looking at Senate there. You're still looking at MCAs, in the counties. There are governors in the counties. There are other county structures that are also there to exert the will of the people. So do we really need that? And that's why I'll agree with the president when it comes to parliament and saying we need to relook how 2% of this nation are taking a huge chunk of our revenue. And not only that, we also need to ask ourselves, are we getting the right representation? Do we really need to see where Moses Kuria is coming from when he says, or when he puts, in his book that Punda Amechoka? Do we really need to see this? Me say yes. I think these are some of the key issues, Hussein, that we need to look into.
Well, I don't think tyranny of numbers was necessarily a bad thing if it is used for the right purposes. I think Jubilee was handed a golden opportunity of having majority in both houses. They were in a position, or they were better positioned to push through their agenda and things that would, of course, have facilitated the implementation of their manifesto. Given that right now we are still auditing and questioning whether Jubilee was able to fulfill much of what they had promised and were planning to do, it means that they never took advantage of that. But the other thing that we saw, and I think it's part of why partisanship was such a key thing. The fact that CORD were outnumbered in Parliament, they resorted to some of these things like what we witnessed during the passage of the Security Amendment laws. And this partly, of course, where the tyranny of numbers at times was abused or misused to bulldoze certain pieces of legislation. But what we saw is that the courts were, of course, always willing to come and correct the situation. So in a sense, I can't say that tyranny of numbers is a bad thing, but I think that is what gave us the Speaker of the National Assembly, where there were many complaints that he was not a neutral arbiter trying to facilitate proper discussion of issues. And I think that has remained quite a challenge. Going forward, like Mutuma has said, we'll always have majority and minority, but it is how that is used to make sure that the government agenda of the day, things that would benefit the common mwananchi, are addressed. And I think that is what we have seen as a great failure in this particular parliament.
What should be the best practice then? A majority from one party or coalition?
I think if Parliament understands its role in terms of the three things that we talked about earlier, it doesn't matter when you talk about majority or minority. If issues are of national importance, for example, security, when you talk about, for example, the food shortage or crisis, Parliament should be able to come together and debate and discuss issues and pass in the interest of Wanjiko. The problem is when somebody has a cheeky agenda and decides to use the tyranny of numbers to bulldoze certain provisions that do not necessarily benefit our country or benefit Mwananchi. Of course, it could be a better situation where we have Parliament, which now acts as a check on the executive, that majority of people would come from, let's say, the opposition or not the ruling party. But then you see what that can also be used. It can be abused to create a gridlock within government and block and frustrate each and everything that the government wants to do. So that balance in terms of Parliament understanding what's our role to represent the people and make sure that the agenda of Wanjiko is getting through, to pass laws that would benefit this country, and of course to provide the checks and balances on the executive, which I think is the one place that we saw a great failure in terms of Parliament not being able to properly check the executive and other state corporations.
All right, Stephen.
Yeah, I can't agree more, and that has been the greatest threat to our democracy, that our parliamentarians do not disabuse themselves of their party affiliation and act as honorable members of Parliament, because once they get sworn in, they are sworn in not to defend their political formations but the Constitution of Kenya, and to always act without fear or favor in the best public interest. And this baggage has really got to be dealt with, and I want to invite media to really police those parliamentarians who are appendages of their political outfits rather than independent contributors to debates that will make this country better through legislation, through effective representation, and very stringent oversight. And that is why sometimes I get appalled when I hear that government projects like the SGR, this is a Jubilee project, and you wonder, this is a budget passed by Parliament with everybody present. How then does it become a product of one political formation and not the other? Really, ownership of the responsibility of a parliamentarian, and that is why it's called a National Assembly, and that is why people are invited to speak as members from constituency A, constituency West Mugirango, and such like. So going forward, and to help this country move forward, people need to be educated that once you are elected to the House, you must act in the best interest, because that is how you are sworn in. You must defend the Constitution, not of your political party, but of the Republic of Kenya.
So what finally should we expect of the 12th Parliament? What should be the best practice? I mean, when the new MPs come in, what should they do that wasn't done by the previous Parliament, including the immediate one, which will be the 11th Parliament? Gabriel.
Number one, I think, like I told you earlier on, Hussein, I think there is an image that needs to be redeemed. I think we need to see serious legislators. I think we also need to see critical bills passed, and everything that is going to better the life of Wanjiko. I think there are other things which I feel my good friend has actually alluded to, which are quite factual, that it does not matter whether you have a majority in Parliament. What really matters is the agendas cars that you drive, are they consistent with what Wanjiku wants, or is this the kind of scenario whereby you're bringing your craziness from wherever you're coming with, and you're using the fact that you have majority in Parliament, to send bills that are actually not popular? So I think apart from the image issue, I think we need to have serious debate in the House. The issue of physical fights, which actually dented the image of this nation, not only Parliament. People throwing cans and bottles of water to the Deputy Speaker. I think, others actually, it is claimed, were removing their, I don't want to say what. I think apart from that image, we're saying we need to have serious legislators. And at this point, I'm happy that we are having a very good youth representation, and I hope we are putting serious people in Parliament. And when it comes to electing the legislators, I think Wanjiku also has a duty, which is quite civic, that she must put people in Parliament who are not only knowledgeable, but people who understand the great opportunities that lie within, and also the great issues that actually affect this country. So if we are taking that stride and understanding what or the direction that we want to go, then Wanjiku has a solemn duty of electing a good leadership, or that will actually put her in the right cause of the challenges that we face in the 21st century.
All right, Sam.
Well, Hussein, I know we are focused on some of the negatives and the laws that we have seen with this Parliament. Of course, there are certain good things that we have also seen. Of course, Mutuma has talked about the representation or increased representation of younger people within Parliament. Whether it has improved the quality of debate, that remains to be seen. But the other thing is there are certain investigations like the National Youth Fund and NYS, where other investigative bodies had completely failed or maybe given them a clean bill of health. But Parliament reopened the matter and certain issues came up. So in that sense, of course, we can say there have been successes. Going forward, going by past trends, we have seen that 65 to 75% of the parliamentarians are normally voted out. We expect that again in these coming elections, 65 again to 75% going by past trends, we still expect that majority of these people will not make it back, will have fresh blood. Whether they will learn from the mistakes of the past, and whether, for example, in electing the speaker, they will put in place people who understand their role as an arbiter, and of course in terms of what we talked about, public interest and legislation that of course looks at the national interest. That remains to be seen. But ideally, what you'd hope to see is that is improved debate. The tension between Senate and National Assembly, I think it still remains to be resolved. We still haven't clarified which is the upper house, as I believe the Constitution envisaged in the beginning. And this, of course, has in a sense emasculated Senate, because everything they tend to do has to go through the National Assembly. This tension needs to be resolved to make sure that issues are being passed and that Parliament is actually doing its rightful role.
Finally, Stephen?
Yeah, I think what we look forward to is the 12th Parliament should really know that Parliament is supreme, and it is one of the three arms of government, and its critical role is to check on the executive and also set the agenda for the executive. I want to see a little more robust debates coming from legislators that do not promote parochial but national interests, so that a law that is enacted protects the weakest in Mandera as much as it will protect the weakest in West Mugrango, where I'm hoping to contest and win as a parliamentarian. But more importantly, our National Assembly should project a national image and disabuse itself of this so-called brutality of numbers, no matter what the numbers are going to play like. But fortunately this time we are going to have quite a few independents, and these chest thumping about brutality of numbers is not likely to be affected. I also want to see a house that earns honor, because we saw under the protection of brutality of numbers a Speaker of the National Assembly dismissing court orders as idiotic. I mean, that was really unparliamentary, and coming as it did from the chair did not project our National Assembly as an assembly that upholds rule of law. But going forward, this country needs very serious minds in the National Assembly if oversight is going to be effective, and we do pray that those who qualify to come to the National Assembly will project a different image of this country and take this country to the next level in terms of budget provisions, in terms of oversight, and in terms of the quality of the debates that we churn out of our houses. We want to inspire our school-going children so that they say when we grow up we want to be a legislator like Steve Mogaka, and I think I'll set that that standard.
Okay, we'll see how that goes. Finally, I think some can respond to this. An interesting question here. Somebody says, my question is, does it mean that members of the minority are not capable of bringing any good motion in the House?
Hussein, of course, we saw a few attempts by the minority side to bring certain bills into the House when something, of course, is of national importance. And I think that is where the minority and the majority divide is important. When you want to pass something that would benefit Wanjiko, for example, the capping of interest rates was seen as something positive. It was supported by both sides of the House. And this is where we talk about consensus building. This is where people have to talk together and agree that this is what they're doing. And that is their responsibility. So even people from the minority, if they use the right approach and the issues are things that will benefit Mwananchi, then there are things that will be supported and debated. And I think we have seen a bit of that in this parliament.
All right, Dr. Sam Kamau is a political analyst, and Gabriel Muzuma is also a political analyst. Stephen Mogaka, you've heard him talking there, political analyst and Wiper candidate for West Mugirango constituency, trying to be an MP in the 12th Parliament. We wish you all the best of luck. Thank you all for making time for us this morning. We're taking a short break now, so the next will continue after this.